Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, hello there. It's kind of funny, Morgan, looking at the outline for today's show. And it's funny because I drive to work this morning. I'm listening to the newscast, and it's like they're hammering Trump, as it always is. And this week seems like it's going to be particularly bad for him as the Democrats look to pull in all these witnesses. So then I look at our show rundown and I say, okay, we're going to address that a little bit, but we're going to look at these other people who might be doing some bad stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, we got a lot of things to talk about today. This is just a huge couple of weeks in the news, I think. It's hard to cover it all, and it's certainly hard to cover it and do it much justice. We got from last week, we've got a lot of news coming out. All the way from, you see this story about the two Ukrainians, which actually are American citizens, which I think is kind of interesting. The way the news tends to refer to them as they were the two Ukrainians having lunch with Giuliani. But these guys are Floridians. These guys are, and they've got their American citizenship. So, they're Americans. Anyway, they are allegedly involved in some kind of scheme to circumvent campaign finance laws. And the most that we can make out of it as to what the allegations are is that maybe they were putting together money outside of the country. Like the implication is maybe they were working with Ukrainians to put together funds of money and get those into U.S.-based political action committees or PACs. And, of course, you're innocent until proven guilty. So we'll have to wait and see what comes of that. But I certainly, my sort of takeaway from that is, man, can the DOJ and the FBI and federal law enforcement move quickly when they can go arrest somebody and it's going to be a bad story for Donald Trump. And it's going to look bad for Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump. And, maybe Rudy Giuliani has been breaking the law. You would kind of think he's sophisticated enough to avoid that, but maybe he's gotten a little bit off the reservation. Maybe he was breaking the law. I don't know. But, man, can they move fast on that stuff? Meanwhile, if any actual federal law enforcement officials are breaking the law, like, say, Jim Comey, former FBI director, with all of his leaks to the newspapers, all these strategic leaks, isn't it a bit of a shame what's become of our law enforcement and intelligence services in this country? And I certainly don't mean, your average police officer or kind of on-the-ground, boots-on-the-ground law enforcement. I'm talking about the higher levels, the executive levels of the top law enforcement agency in the country, the FBI. And, of course, all of our intelligence services. They've become so politicized. I think it's a real shame. I think it's an embarrassment to our country that these folks that are supposed to be above politics and you ever interview them or hear them interviewed, and they just can't trumpet enough how we don't make decisions based on political calculations. We've all got our own political views, but those don't have any effect on our federal law enforcement jobs. And you heard that from people like Peter Strzok. Meanwhile, the guy sends like 12,000 text messages a day. I don't see how he was doing any federal law enforcement in between all his texting with his girlfriend, but all they could talk about is politics. So, man, that guy
He's definitely doing voice to text. No way can he type that much all day long.
The guy's like, it's like a hot water faucet or something. On, off, on, off, on, off. One moment it's politics. Now I'm back to being a law enforcement officer, not affected by politics. Now I'm back to politics. Boy, I hate Trump. Got to have an insurance policy. Now I'm back to law enforcement. I'm not affected by that. Now I'm back to politics. All day long, on and off, all day. If you believe what they want you to believe, which is, we're above the fray, we're not political, to me, it just strains credulity. To me, I can't swallow that pill. I don't believe it. It doesn't sound real to me.
And, then Congress goes away for a 2-week vacation, and they come back, and the only thing they want to do is arrest people now. The first thing they say.
Arrest them.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is that normal proceedings?
Exactly. First of all, they haven't even had an impeachment vote, so we don't even have a true official impeachment inquiry, and at least in the way that it's always been done in the past. And I understand that nothing in the Constitution or any other particular legal document that would apply says that they have to do it a certain way. That's because it just doesn't come up much. But every time it's been done in the past, it started out with a vote of the House of Representatives on whether or not to impeach. In this case, they've totally suppressed that. They haven't had a vote. Nancy Pelosi says, well, we're just proceeding. And, of course, she does it sorrowfully and prayerfully, and she's heartbroken. And, I mean, it's like they would almost do better if they wouldn't try to add on so much BS. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? If they'd just be honest, like, hey, we just hate this guy. We've hated him for 4 years. We want him out of there. We know we can't win the election. You know what I mean? Because isn't that what they're really telling you now? They're doing this now 13 months before an election. I mean, would a smarter thing to do if you really want to invest in our system, invest in the idea of a representative democracy, whatever you want to call it, a republic, wouldn't it be better to participate in that political process rather than to have this sort of hybrid impeachment process that they've got going on with no set of rules, where they've excluded the minority party, which is the Republicans, from doing anything, from participating, from even knowing what's going on? I mean, why would you, if your goal is to get to the truth, why are you doing it behind closed doors? Why is Adam Schiff interviewing all these people behind closed doors and then leaking out little bits and pieces of the transcripts that he thinks sound good for his side? Why don't they release the whole transcript? Why don't they let people read for themselves? Now, listen, I know most people don't have time to do all this reading for themselves, and that's one of the sad states of our world today is that you really, if you just trust somebody else to do your news and analysis for you, unless it's the Morgan Streetman show, you're not going to get the straight story. You know what I mean?
I had somebody over the weekend tell me that about your show. They said Morgan's the only one that opens our eyes to things that we never hear anywhere.
It's unbelievable. And I get sick of it. I mean, as I was riding in, I was listening to NPR, of all things. I mean, and it's almost maddening. I mean, it almost drives you a little bit insane listening to the way they're spinning everything, all the propaganda. And I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to program us to look at these issues and these facts in a certain light. And why don't you just let me think about things the way I want to think about things, the way my brain works? Why don't you let people evaluate these things for themselves?
Another one of your listeners, my daughter, in my stomach. She kicks up a storm. 10 a.m. Monday. I get more kicks and punches. So it's either that she loves Morgan's voice or she's really passionate about these issues as well, or maybe a combination of both.
I mean, she gets fired up. She's in there. She's cheered me on. She's like, you tell him, Morgan. You tell him. Punch Mom again. You tell him. Go get him. Go get him. Well, it's too much. I mean, unfortunately, there's too much detail for us to cover in some of this Ukraine stuff. But I'll tell you, there's some great videos out there, and I want to point folks to one in particular that I've watched. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to see it, but it's one of these famous Glenn Beck chalkboard videos, where he gets out the chalkboards and he has these lengthy explanations on the chalkboards. And it's about an hour long, and it goes into all of this Ukraine stuff. I mean, literally all of it, not just the little pieces of the Trump phone call this year, not just the little pieces of the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden involvement kind of at the beginning, but it sort of goes through everything in between. And the stuff that's been going on in Ukraine and around the world where a lot of our aid funds are distributed, and this is going back to some of this, it's USAID and other ways that we take funds and we distribute them throughout the world. And also we're involved in things like the IMF, and we've talked some about that on this show, about how unfairly we can treat some of these nations that aren't as far along maybe as we are by going in and making these big development loans to the nations, which then a lot of times are abused by the leadership. So the leadership takes part of the loan for itself. They essentially embezzle the funds. And, of course, who's on the hook for it? It's the people of the country, and what secures it? It's the resources of the country, like, for instance, the natural gas resources. So we give all this money to these corrupt leaders. They steal a whole bunch of it. They can't do the economic projects that the money would support. Things don't happen, and then they can't pay back the loan. And then we say, well, that's no problem because we'll just take some of your natural gas reserves, and those are ours now. And you see, that's kind of a way. And there's a book out there called Confessions of an Economic Hitman that if you're interested in reading up on this, you may want to read up on that. But that's kind of how we conduct ourselves in large part. Now, you do want to go out. I want you to go out and watch that Glenn Beck video. If you just type into YouTube, Glenn Beck Chalkboard Ukraine, you'll get to the video. There's a couple different versions of it, but the version that's about an hour long is plenty long enough. That one gets you into enough of the detail. And that'll kind of explain the whole lay of the land in Ukraine to you. But what we could say here is it's very complicated and it's very corrupted. But our political establishment is right there playing ball with the corrupted officials. And this is going back to the Obama administration. And they're playing ball with them, and they're using Ukraine as a conduit for various things. And it gets into the Manafort issues and everything else. There's a lot there to look into. But Ukraine is a very corrupt place. And you just have to wonder, what did Hunter Biden do for the $3 million?
Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.